the internet's #1 on the World Wide Web. iLive Radio. Rare groove, revival, slow jams, upfront, old school.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Patrick Morris, and welcome to Mars versus Venus. On today's show, I've got my special guest, Georgia Fullerton, or otherwise known as Just Georgia. Yes. Today, the topic of conversation, as we join the show, and the show really is to talk about the differences between men and women, and sometimes we communicate differently, we speak different languages, sometimes we just don't understand each other. And so today's topic is more in and around, we're going to talk a little bit about how trauma or abuse kind of impacts how we communicate with one another, both from a male perspective, from a female perspective. And Georgia, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you are a visual arts extraordinaire, as well as you do some therapy work as well.
Yes.
So you give us a little spiel about who you are.
Okay. Well, as you said, I am a visual artist. I've been an artist forever. And I have since been creating my work, selling it, promoting it, and exhibiting it. And all these years of visual art have actually brought me through my own experiences based on the topic that we're conversing about today. And it led me into the journey of expressive arts. So in saying that, I am currently pursuing becoming a therapist, an expressive arts therapist, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I guess. But yeah, I'm just a lover of all things creative, culture, arts, all the musings of life, and I have I think a vested interest in relationships and how we build them, break them down, change them, all of that.
Okay. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about expressive arts.
Expressive arts is unlike just the arts. Expressive arts is sort of a combination of all of the arts. So it would be visual arts, dance, movement, poetry or storytelling, drama, theater. So it's a combining of all of the arts, and a lot of discoveries can be made in kind of touching each one of those things.
Now, expressive arts is a way, like you said, for someone to express themselves.
Yeah.
But how does this tie into the therapy piece?
Well, the therapy is, I actually felt that it was a natural transition for me to move from being just a visual artist to exploring expressive arts. And the piece about therapy is something I've always been interested in, the psychology of art and how we are all connected by it. So to tell you a little bit about how expressive arts therapy works, it is a client-based approach to therapy, and unlike just art therapy, expressive arts therapy, like I said, uses all of the arts. So we might use something like words, writing poetry, and from the poetry, we can create a visual image. The therapeutic part of it, I can only speak on briefly, just because I am in training. I am still a student. But from my experience at the college that I'm attending, we try and use all those modalities and find ways to discover things about ourselves, to bring about our resources that we never thought we had through the arts. A lot of times, myself or other people can't necessarily speak on what challenges that we have, but if we use drawing or movement, sometimes that speaks louder than the actual word.
Now, when we're talking about trauma or abuse or something negative that happens in someone's life, how are some of the ways that those things kind of exhibit, display themselves towards others?
Just what I said, because from my experience, you can actually internalize a lot of, or I have internalized a lot of the things that have happened, be they traumatic or just life-changing. And for me, my experience was to actually express myself through my painting. And it was kind of interesting because I found that things came out in the images that I didn't know I was feeling or thinking about. And it's just sort of a freeing way of expressing yourself and finding a way of healing those things that you can't tangibly feel, can't tangibly touch or see. So for me, it was a way of returning to myself, a way of realizing that not only can I do visual arts, but I can listen to music and it can have an effect on me. It can have an effect on the next painting that I decide to do. So in that sense, it is really a healing mechanism.
Now, from a relationship standpoint, has, you know, some of the trauma that you went through, has that impacted your relationship with the opposite sex?
Of course. Yeah, it was, just to give you a little bit of background, it was a one-time abusive situation. And it was formulated, or it came about by being in a vulnerable place and deciding to, you know, partner or be with someone who was the complete opposite of my former partner. And, you know, if you're not exposed to a controlling person or that kind of attitude, and someone who has an anger issue, for me, I was naive. So I let things go for a while, and it did change. After the abuse, it did change my relationship with myself, of course, and also my view of men. Because when you're aware of all the red flags that go up, you're cognizant of it in whoever you come up against. So for me, it was sort of expressed, I could say, negatively at first, in terms of, I don't care about any of these guys, I'm going to do what I want. And so you have somewhat of a not carefree, but not a self-care attitude. And so your relationships can be somewhat superficial. But I think what's most important when I talk about relationships and in the same space as trauma or abuse, I think what's most important is what you learn about yourself. And yeah, I was in a place where I had to regain my power and belief in myself.
So when you, you know, after the traumatic relationship that you were in, and when you went and started having conversations with other individuals that might possibly have a relationship with, what were, you'd mentioned that there were some red flags that sort of came up for you. What were some of those red flags, or that, you know, kind of put your back against the wall or something like that?
Well, I think what comes to mind right away is someone, again, I'm going to use the word controlling, someone sort of being very picky or particular about how long it takes you to get from A to B, if you said you're going to be here in half an hour. So those kinds of things I would look at, continuous calling, checking up on you. Yeah. Those things, you know, previously I would view them as, oh, this person just can't get enough of me. They're around me all the time. They want to know my every move. But then when you go through what you go through, or when I went through what I went through, it changes how I view that person.
So if you met a guy and you were supposed to meet him or something and you were late and he wasn't happy with the fact you were late, would that sort of trigger a similar response as before?
As before, the previous relationship?
Yeah, because you were coming out of a more of a controlling relationship, you were saying.
Yeah.
You know, this guy, you know, it might be somewhat innocent in what he was doing, but because it was similar, was there any kind of connections between things like that?
Well, I would do one of two things. I would either shut down and just stop communication because I had my own thinking in terms of how they were kind of trying to keep tabs on me, or I would communicate it. I would express, you know, my concern about, well, if I say I'm going to be at this place at a certain time, I will be there. So that's the learning part, where you can either shut down communication and just stay in your own world, and play the martyr or whatever, or you can talk about it. And I chose to talk about it because I knew that part of my relationships breaking down was because of communication and honest communication. So when you get to a place where you can be honest with yourself, then it's easier for you to communicate with men who may not have that skill or ability, and that's always a challenge anyway.
Now, there are, I've spoken to a lot of people throughout my life in regards to a lot of experiences that they've had, and some women or some men who've gone through a traumatic experience, they do find it very difficult to be able to talk about it because they feel somehow maybe it's their fault what they went through, or sometimes they feel that they did something or they should have done something that they didn't do. There's a lot of blame that they sort of rest on themselves. Did you find any of that? Did you go through any of that sort of process at first to look at yourself and ask those questions of yourself or blame yourself for the situation?
Most definitely. I think that is part of it. And I went through stages of depression, anger, not necessarily in this order, a lot of guilt, because it's combined with reflecting on your previous relationships and looking at the one you're currently in. And for me, I was blaming myself because I was thinking, I should have seen the signs. I stayed too long. I allowed this to happen, that to happen, even to the point where some of my artwork was taken from me within this relationship. So those are the things that really pinged me. And yeah, you do go through a lot of emotions. It's a roller coaster, and it's good to have support if you can. I'm one of those people who it takes me a long time to ask for help. So I sat in my depression or my anger or my sorrow or my guilt for some time.
Now, when you're in that state of feeling depressed about the situation that you've gone through, how do you climb out of that? Like, what did you do? How did you climb out of that? Or if somebody who's listening is listening to this message here, and that is in that state where they're feeling depressed about what they've just gone through or are going through, what would you say to that person about how to claw your way out of that? Because it can seem such a huge mountain to climb.
Yeah, it is daunting because you tend to think you're the only one, right? I thought I was the only one going through this, but again, I'm going to say support, and support can come in so many different ways. Those people who don't have families, they may not have that support to hold on to. For me, I experienced support from my family immediately, which was still difficult to communicate everything that had happened to them. But I would say support is huge with family. Also, of course, any sort of counseling. There's a lot of services that are offered, and I went through that whole process. Victim services and the multitude of other counseling approaches. But I think my own personal method of coping with it was through the arts.
Now, when you went through what you went through, and so now when you are walking into a relationship, or you see somebody across the room and you decide, hey, it's kind of cute, or he's looking at you or whatever, how do you bridge that gap in your mind to make sure that you're looking at that person and not the stuff that happened?
Yeah, well, just giving that example that you gave, you see somebody looking across the room, that doesn't move me anymore. Just that is not enough. So yeah, you're going to make an initial communication, but for me, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I tend to think about the way that I am, the integrity that I have within myself, as well as my own boundaries. And that's what happened between the abuse and moving back into the so-called dating world. You do learn to understand and set your own standards, and you set boundaries as well.
I want to invite people, if you want to join in the conversation, you have any questions for Georgia or myself, by all means, you can hit us up on Twitter. It's at Patrick O. Morris, or at iLive Radio, and send us your questions, and we'll do our best to sort of answer those. Now, when we look at the trauma that you went through, and from a male perspective, how can you help me to be able to, if I do see you and I am interested and want to get to know you and spend the time and all of that, and I might inadvertently do something that reminds you or triggers an experience that you remember in the past, and I might do that innocently. You never know. Like I wouldn't necessarily know what experiences that you've had fully in the past, or what emotional ties that you may necessarily have on that. But how do you help that good guy to be able to bridge that gap for you? Help him to be able to take a stand and I don't know, hold your hand through what it is that you're going through. We're gonna take a short break, which is station identification, and when we come back, I want you to be able to give a little bit of advice on that, because there's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of people, men and women, who get a little bit stuck in what was, and then it's hard to look at somebody with fresh eyes,
Right.
and be able to kind of take them as they are, so to speak. I remember something I once heard, and someone said, hold me accountable for my sins, not for somebody else's. You just need to get over it. There's a lot of conversations in and around that. So we're going to take a short break for some station identification, and then we'll come right back here on Mars versus Venus.
Great.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
The internet's #1 on the World Wide Web. iLive Radio.
Welcome back to Mars versus Venus. I'm speaking with Georgia, and just before the break, Georgia, you were gonna give some advice to a brother. See this hot chick across the room, and I start talking to her, and we seem to have a decent connection, but I end up having a little bit, seem to feel like I'm in a roadblock sometimes.
A lot of that, to give advice is one thing, but the man really has to know how he operates too, and how he views women, because his approach he may think is perfectly fine, whereas she may be disrespected by it, or put off by it, or really enticed by it. And for me, again, it's how you present yourself, how you perceive yourself is how you're going to approach a woman. For me, I like to think of myself as someone who is well-rounded and has a lot to offer. And as well, I have a really huge respect for men who can approach me in a thoughtful way, in a respectful way. And respect means different things to different people sometimes. But to give advice, again, just to be yourself and be open, that should tell the woman enough as to whether or not she wants to continue conversation or keep connected with this person.
Well, once we've crossed that threshold and we're talking for a few times, how can I help you? If you're dealing with some stuff from the past, that either has been resolved or unresolved, but they're still there, because you never really get over a situation that happens that's traumatic. You do learn how to deal with it and how to cope with it. But if you are in a relationship with somebody, you're in a partnership with somebody, at times things can pop up based on what was.
Yes.
Right. So how do you, if I might do something that that might remind you or trigger something for you, and I'm doing it completely innocently. You know, there are some women who shut down, some women who in turn become abusive towards the guy, and then sometimes we don't have a clue
Right.
as to what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, so how do we bridge that?
Again, that goes back to what I say about communication, but what you said about recurring, that's one of the elements of trauma, that it never completely goes away. As far as my knowledge, it never completely goes away. It will remind you again and again based on who you're around and what you're doing. So that's a really good question. How can I help the person? Again, or the man, it depends on the two people involved. Like for me, how I have approached previous partners after this abusive relationship, sometimes I get a sense of how honest this person is with me and how open they want to be. And because I'm somewhat of a wear my heart on the sleeve kind of person, if the situation is right, if we start to talk about, say we've had conversation about our past relationships and what were the tendencies there and why it ended. You know, some people say it's not good to talk about your past stuff, but when you have gone through something that you feel will impact the current potential relationship, I think it makes sense to approach it. If you so-called trust the person. So how I do things is, if I feel a good sense with that individual and feel like it's authentic, I'm not afraid to share my story or elements of the story, to maybe not giving full details. But yeah, I think to talk to the other person, it's huge. I've been in a situation before where I shared information with a man about what I had gone through, and he was blown away because he had had the same experience, but he was the victim. He was the one abused. And that was new for me. So it put things on a different plane in terms of our conversation and connection.
Well, that's, you know, you hit on a pretty valid point there, and a lot of times when we talk about abusive relationships, there are a lot of relationships that men are abused.
Yeah.
And whether it be psychologically or physically, but in our society we don't really hear a whole lot of that being addressed. And that's, you know, definitely something that we're going to explore on another show. I'm going to, you know, bring a guy in. We're going to talk about it from the male perspective, what it was like kind of going through the experience that they went through. But when, you know, for yourself and as a woman, looking into the eyes of a guy, and a guy who, you know, honestly cares about you and wants to help you, you know, speaking with a lot of guys, sometimes they feel like there's nothing they can do. They feel like, you know, every time they say something, what's heard is kind of different. I was reading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus the other day, and
Appropriately.
and one of the things that they talked about, how men and women process information, and that is that, you know, a lot of times when men hear things, we kind of take it in and we sort of spit that back out. It's more logical. It's more, you know, 1, 2, 3. But when women are thinking about something or they hear something, they take so many different factors into play that sometimes what comes out may not necessarily be straight logic, like as how a guy would look at it. And so I'm just curious, you know, when you've gone through what you've gone through, and most as a guy, I'm kind of looking at you logically, you know, 1 = 2. Okay, so you went through what you went through. You're good now. You had some therapy. You know, everything's great now. You know, why are we still dealing with this? Why would this still come up again?
Well, this is life. I mean, there's always hills and valleys, right? And as I said before, different things can trigger the same feelings, the same emotions. And, you know, they do say that women are much more emotional based than men. Men deal with things cerebrally, but I don't totally disagree with that, but I think that there's a mix of both. Yeah, it's one of those things where I still feel that I have to deal with it as it comes, not just in a potential partner, but any man that I might meet who wants to have some communication with me, be that business or otherwise. I have to consider my emotional state. I have to consider their emotional state. And I think I'm more sensitive to men now that I've gone through that situation, how I processed it was very much emotional based, and I had my own method of recovery, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that there's any difference between men and women in terms of how they recover, how they heal from those things. What you talked about in the book, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the processes, like how we process that differently. Because there's also that thinking that I had for a while, which was, nobody's gonna, if I tell somebody this, if I tell a man about what I went through, they're gonna think, oh, she's damaged goods, like she's got issues, man. We all have issues, right?
This is true.
I think we all have issues, but it's how we deal with them, how we process them.
And one thing I wanted to touch on, and that is what you just mentioned, and that is the damaged goods piece of it. And obviously, when something's done to you, it's very easy to take that on yourself and feel that you've been damaged. And if you've been damaged, then who's going to want me?
Right.
And then there's sometimes you end up in a relationship, and if you feel that way about yourself, then it's hard for you to really be able to have a real open, honest, and strong relationship with someone else. So, for somebody who's in that state, who might feel that way, they feel that the experience I went through, I'm too broken to be with somebody that's nice. And then sometimes they end up going through the same cycle where the next person they enter in a relationship with is very similar to the last person, because that's what, in a way, they kind of feel subconsciously that's what they sort of deserve, even though on the surface they say that's not what they want.
Right.
Like how does that work? That's
acceptance. You have to accept what you've gone through and know that you're not the only person who's gone through that. It's a kind of a tough one to answer, because I think there's different ways that everybody deals with it. Boy, dead air.
Everybody does deal with it differently.
Yeah,
but if you're in a state where you feel like, I'm too broken or I'm too damaged for anybody to want me, what do I do?
And I don't want to sound like this is too negative, but human suffering is part of life, and human suffering, just that term alone, to me sounds really heavy. But it can be the subtlest thing, and it can affect your entire life. But I feel like if you surround yourself with people who you want to be around, first you have to recognize the patterns that you continuously go through. You're choosing the same type of person. Well, I like the bad boy just because that's something in me, and but then you have to deal with the consequences of that. Reassess what your likes are. You might discover something different that you tend to gravitate towards better, or it aligns with you better. We resonate with different people, and sometimes we just don't give ourselves enough of an opportunity to discover that or explore that. Again, I speak from my own experience, and what I ended up doing was just kind of internalize things in a way where I had to look at, well, how do I exercise self-care? Because I can't go out there and find a man who is all that I want him to be if I still have, this broken beauty within me that I'm trying to have other people see in a different way. It's almost like a little bit of isolation too that I went through, because I had to spend time with myself and read, play, paint, communicate with my family, friends who were supportive of me. I would recommend that. Again, I sound like a broken record, but I recommend that those are the things that worked for me. And I think it would work both ways.
Part of the challenge, though, and if you're in that state, the last thing you want to do is be alone, because you feel that isolation, you feel that loneliness. The last thing that it may be the best thing for you based on what you're saying, but the last thing you feel like you want to do is be alone. Or sometimes all you want to do is be alone. You don't want to be with anybody, and you sort of live in that situation. There are a lot of drug companies out there that make a lot of money. For people who are feeling depressed about their life. There are all these different situations that happen to them. But beyond the drugs, if you stop and you think about it, like how do you know, if I don't have family around me that I can kind of pull from, or if they don't understand, or sometimes it might be difficult for us to be able to have those conversations with our family members.
Yeah.
You know, then what? Then what do you do?
Good question. What do you do?
Well, they take you take your art program.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's an idea right there. It might sound hokey to some people, but go to nature. Going to nature also has a lot of benefits to it. You might not be that type of person, but again, for me, that's what helped. But yeah, if you want to transition into that, talking about the arts is a really good. People don't realize the creativity that they have within themselves and how many areas of their life it can help. I would definitely recommend taking.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Taking some sort of group or some aspect, some involvement, some activity that is completely different than what you're accustomed to, just to get yourself out of just sitting alone in isolation or feeling, sorry for yourself. But there's ways that you can find outlets that will definitely help.
We're going to take another quick break, but before we do, you're heavily into the arts.
Yes.
And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about, how you expressing yourself through art has helped you, as well as what you've seen through the therapy, that you've done, how other people, how that's impacted them with being able to find their artistic self.
Okay.
I guess psychologically there might be a bridge in there somewhere where, if we find another outlet, how does that help us to be able to deal with other areas of our lives? So we're going to take another quick break, and again, I encourage anyone out there. The conversation continues on Twitter at Patrick O. Morris or at iLive Radio. So we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back with Georgia and we'll talk about the artistic piece of this.
Okay.
Music back to back to back. iLive Radio.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
Thank you for hanging out with us here. Once again, we're continuing the conversation with Georgia. And before we took the break, we were talking about finding your artistic self. I'm thinking maybe finding a medium of some way to express yourself might help.
Yeah. We are in an age where creativity is actually huge. It's on the forefront, and I personally think a lot of people don't even realize it, that they are all exercising their creativity, they're all expressing themselves. We look at social media, for example. That is a platform where you can post what you like, what you're into.
Some things people shouldn't.
Some things, yes, should just not be there. But yeah, we do get to show the words we like, the images we like, the videos we like, the movement. So I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, how can I combine the arts with what is current, what everybody is involved in, or most people are involved in? And if I was to say, I believe in the arts and I believe in what the arts can do for your life, I would say that people need to take the time to look at the simple things that we take for granted, things that we view every day, just the fact that we can see every day. There are things out there that cause us to feel a certain way or think a certain way, boost our emotional state, allow us to be introspective to a certain degree. And these are the elements, or these are the benefits that art brings to me. I never thought that I would be, first of all, sitting here talking in front of a camera
about your experience.
About my experience. But again, this is actually a form of therapy for me. It is my mode of expression, and one that I'm maybe not 100% comfortable with, but that's the whole point. People who have gone through, or I who have gone through some trauma, have to understand or accept that there's going to be times when you have to feel or try to feel comfortable within the discomfort of something. And in saying...
So I just want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Because I think our nature is that we don't want to be uncomfortable.
No.
And so how do you force yourself to be uncomfortable, even though, we know it might be, I know it's good for me to go to the gym, all the time,
Yeah.
but it's uncomfortable.
Well, speaking on the expressive arts therapy that I'm training in, that is one of the main aspects of what you learn to do. You learn to sort of approach your challenges or address the challenges that you've come up against, be they psychological, emotional, or whatever. For me, I had a combination of all, and so finding a way to approach those things and knowing that was an uncomfortable time and you want to forget about it naturally, you want to forget about it and move away from it. But I think the road to healing, the road to rising above whatever your trauma is in life, is to be able to really examine it and sit in the discomfort of that. Because for the simple fact that trauma does recur. It does come up again in dreams, in your daily life, in someone who you meet and who you talk to. So for me, to be able to write about something that I went through and sit and read that and discover something else about myself, that, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was so naive or I was so transparent. This is something that I can shape and mold into a different image, right?
So how do you, when you go back and you read those things and you think, oh my God, I was naive, or oh my God, I trusted too easily, or whatever those thoughts are that you create, how do you find a balance in that? Because the pendulum could swing completely the other way, wherein you don't trust anybody. You crave that human companionship, but in order to let somebody into that space, you have a hard time being able to do that. Like, how do you find that balance? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah. I would say, and it sounds simple, but I would say meditation. Meditation helps, because I think it's an exercise in being really present. And I find that is what helps me ground myself. Just to be present and know, because in some of those episodes, when I go back and I look at behavior that I went on with and things that I was around, I know that there were times I wasn't really present. I was just going through whatever emotions, going with the whim of whatever the energy was at that time or place. And again, this is just my view, and I think that to step away from all the drama and the chaos means that you have to kind of quiet your mind and feel grounded. Some of this is my learning in terms of the work that I'm doing now in my, if I can speak on it a little bit.
Yeah. Please.
In the therapy training, we are required to do a certain amount of placement or practicum. So I am doing my placement with a known organization, and it's working primarily with women. So again, my perspective on the men's point of view is limited, but working with women who are on the healing path of having gone through some traumatic experience, there are certain things that are always prevalent when we meet or when I do the work with them, and that is of course to be present. I think one of the biggest successes is just to show up. Just show up at your group, or show up at your friends or people who are supporting you, and to keep the space as safe as possible, meaning try not to judge yourself or each other, be respectful of each other's space and time. And yeah, like I said, a big part of it is feeling grounded. In other words, knowing that you're going through some exercises that will help you feel grounded and feel safe, because one of the things about trauma is that, or certain types of trauma, is that you do feel like you don't have a grounding, you don't have solid footing. And literally, you have to ground yourself, breathe, and these are some of the simple things that have been on my learning path.
It sounds like you've definitely done a fairly good job of trying to put the pieces together after that previous experience. And hey, one thing I'm curious about, and that is, you know, I don't know if you're in a relationship now, but you know, when you enter in a relationship with a guy, from a woman's perspective, how can a guy help you? Considering, you know, you've gone through what you've gone through. It wasn't my fault why you went through what you went through, but you know what? I'm here now, and I'm interested in partnering with you. And so, how do I help you to be able to either express yourself or to be free in who you are, you know, so that we can create something? Because I think sometimes, from a guy's perspective, we have a hard time. We don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You know, we stand there and we may know limitedly about what has happened to you, but our ability to be, you know, sometimes it's easier just to say, you know what, enjoy. It might
Catch you later.
It might seem kind of cold, but sometimes it's like,
But
you know what, I didn't break you, so it shouldn't be my job to put you back together.
Yeah.
You know, so there are some guys who would do that, and then there are some guys who are like, you know, I generally want to help, but I don't know how. You know, there's lots of different stuff in there.
Yeah.
From a guy's perspective, how can I build a bridge with somebody who might feel that they're broken, who might feel that they're not worthy, who might feel not, you know, they don't deserve a nice guy like me. You know, how what do I do?
Well, that great question, great way of putting it too, because I can say that from my point of view, I think one of the first things I would say, and just through my learning too, one of the first things I would say to someone who I'm interested in, who's interested in me, and how can they help me through this is, you know, meet me where I'm at, first of all, because, and even when you consider our age, whatever age you're at, for me, you know, everybody's got certain things up to a certain point in their adulthood life, but if you can meet me where I'm at, which means be open to what I'm telling you, don't judge me. These sound like simple things, but they might be big things for men who have a certain type of woman that they're interested in, or they want to see certain things. I have a certain type of man that I'm interested, and even if there is a huge attraction, and he's not, for example, into the arts or culture or anything like that, I would try and invite him to join in what I'm interested in. And be genuine about whether you're interested or not in those things. And that's part of the healing process too for me. That's part of someone opening up themselves and accepting where I'm at, and then from there exploration and learning about each other can happen.
So meeting you where you are in terms of the struggle that you're going through. So, okay, I'm here.
Okay, so
Now
say for example, I meet Patrick, and Patrick has a whole slew of stuff he's gone through in life. Yeah, he used to be a real high roller, and he got himself involved in drugs, and he got himself in.
You're not talking about me.
No,
right?
just
Okay,
this is
all
a pseudo Patrick, and right, and you know, he's got all this baggage and all these things happening, but there's something about Patrick that I just find, like, intuitively I'm connected to him. There's ways that he speaks, and he's got a poetic, okay, this is maybe semi-pseudo Patrick. He's got a very poetic way of expressing himself, and that's appealing to me. But all this other crap that I've learned about, right, is still there. From my point of view, I'm sort of like, well, I need to give him an opportunity to give me a little bit of history on himself. And let's find a way to come together. I'm going to meet you where you're at. I'm going to respect the fact that you might not be a self-made man, but there's stuff that's happened that's put you where you are today. So, you know, other than just talking it out, what can I say?
Talking it out, I think a lot of what you've been saying so far has a lot to do with communication.
Yeah, it's huge.
And the challenge is in how to communicate the experience.
Yeah.
And with talking with different people, sometimes when you talk about the experience, all of a sudden it's like you're making it more real, or you're reliving, the experience that you went through. And so what might come out may not necessarily be, the way you want to express it. So, I guess from both sides of the fence. So from me on the outside looking in, who's trying to help, and you're delivering that message to me, what are some of the things that I could do that would make you feel comfortable, whether it's my body language or, what are some of the things that I could do to make you feel a little bit more comfortable in that?
Exercise patience with me. Ask me questions. Me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not speaking for all women. I could never. I could never do that. But for me, what works for me is, please be open. Please don't be afraid to ask me what you need to know. Even things that you might not want to hear the answer. It might prompt me to be a little bit more courageous in giving you more information. You can help me by being, it sounds hokey, but a gentleman. Be a gentleman. Be respectful. Show interest in what my strengths and weaknesses are. If you see that we go to a function together and I tend to stay stuck to you, or if I'm wandering off, either one of those scenarios might cause some issue between us, right? But
I want to talk a little bit more on that. We're going to take another quick break, because in our society today, there's a lot of women who are like, I can do this myself. I don't really need a guy. And then there are a lot of women who, say they want a guy who's a gentleman. And from a guy's perspective, there are sometimes we really are very confused because we hear so many different things,
That's
whether
fair.
it's through the media or, some women say this, some women say that, someone, I'm old-fashioned, others, I don't need a man to do anything for me, like all these different things. And so from a male's perspective, when we meet somebody, we're trying to figure that stuff out. It's a little bit confusing. So I want us to come back to this point after we take a short break right now, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about this.
okay.
World Wide Web. iLive Radio. Music back to back to back. iLive Radio.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
Welcome back, and we're back with Georgia, Just Georgia, and just before we took the break, I was saying from a lot of guys, we're really sometimes we're kind of confused because we're not really sure as to how sensitive we should be, or how much, or whether or not we should be sensitive. There are some women that like a guy to open a door, and others they want to open the door for themselves.
Right.
They're even when it comes to a woman who's been through some trauma, there's some things she looks for from a guy, and then others she doesn't. And so sometimes it's from a guy's perspective. Sometimes we're a little bit confused because we don't really know what you want. And even for personal experience, there's sometimes you meet a woman who's had some trauma, and at one moment she's trying embrace you and put you close, and the minute she's kind of pushing you away, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so we get a little confused by this.
Fair enough. It's nothing's wrong with taking your time, showing a bit of patience. And what I mean by that is get to know each other. It sounds old-fashioned, but there's so much value in that. We all have tendencies. When we get into a relationship, or even considering getting into a relationship, we all have tendencies that we automatically go to doing this or go to doing that. Again, why not talk about it? Why not find out a little bit more about that person? And you can never avoid approaching things that might cause some friction, when you're getting to know someone. That's part of it, part of the relationship building. but you know what you said about men being a little bit confused, and then women are wanting of this in one moment, and then the next moment they want something
Or
else.
sometimes you expect us to know.
Yeah,
And
that's
we
it
don't
too.
know.
Again, communication is dwindling these days. Even, I mean, just to touch on kids, you even look at how kids communicate. They find it really difficult. They're not communicating the way we used to then coming up. But again, I can't stress that enough. For me, it would be really cool if I could engage someone who I'm interested in what I do. Come and live in my world for a little while. Let's create some art around whatever this issue is that we have. They might draw back. They might think that it's a really weird way to communicate, but believe it or not, it does reap a lot of benefits just to see what you can create together. And by doing that, you might reach a different plateau.
Maybe not you, but some women, they feel that if the guy figures it out on his own, it means more than if she actually tells him.
It's not being
So
respectful.
is there any truth to that? If you wanted roses and you told me you wanted flowers and I got you flowers, it would mean less than if I just got you flowers.
I can't speak to every woman. It depends on the woman, right? I'm probably stopping every one of your questions, but maybe I'm an oddball. I don't know, but yeah, there are, we can't read minds. There is a sense of energy between people who seem to be aligned or have some kindred spirit between each other, but you cannot read each other's minds. You have to talk. You have to communicate. Find some form. Find some way to do that. And
so, within everything that we've been talking about, the trauma and the experience of that, some of the things that you went through, the common theme that you've really said really comes back to being able to communicate. And so your ability to be able to communicate what has happened to you, and then the other person's ability to be able to receive that communication. And you mentioned a few times about patience, having patience. I think sometimes, it's difficult to have patience when we don't know the whole story. And it's, being able to tell the whole story could be time consuming,
yes,
but it's also very painful.
yes.
And
Yeah, it's a touchy thing, isn't it?
it is. And so,
Well, I can say that do it anyway, but but
just gotta suck it up.
Yeah, well, in a sense you do, but I have different ways of working things out for myself. At the end of the day, I think men and women will never be the same in how they process things. I don't believe that, but I think that they can come to an understanding with each other if they do have that patience, that willingness to sit and hear the other person out. It's not impossible. There was a period where I had to retreat. I call it retreat back to my ex-husband's home to gather myself after my experience happened. And that 6 months was a huge learning piece. I was in, a 10-foot by 10-foot room with 3 huge canvases and all my paints. And that's where my journey began. I had to be patient in that. And, it's an interesting sort of play between men and women. I think if we can learn from what we've gone through and realize that we each have our own strengths and we each have our own way of communicating and expressing, I think it warrants having a little patience with each other.
Now, if you could tell me a little bit, what Just Georgia?
Just Georgia?
Yeah.
Just Georgia is it's a company that I started up in 2013. I registered the company, and what I see it as, it's an arts-based business. It offers a product and a service. The product is my fine art. That's under the guise of Fullerton Fine Art Collection. So that's sort of a promotion of all of my original art. But in future, what I want to do is bring on other artists whose work I'm interested in. But Just Georgia itself is, I offer expressive arts workshops and Currently, I've done a few workshops with children in a shelter, male and female children in a shelter who have experienced loss, isolation, some trauma, and abuse. And so what we offer is ways that we can look at self-esteem, relationship building, conflict resolution, even though that sounds like a really heavy word. But we use the arts to do that, to bring about that. If you look at just the youth of today, there's a lot of kids who have problems with anxiety and depression, and they have problems communicating just in the traditional way of speaking or whatever. So we use voice, we use words, we use movement and visual arts for them to be able to express themselves, and they discover a lot of resources. But my main interest is to work with women, specifically creative women who have experienced some kind of block, either emotionally, psychologically, physically, that stops them from doing their craft. And so I have a number of, Just Georgia has a number of workshops, themes that I offer your organization, your nonprofit group, your school, whatever it may be. Maybe I should do one on Mars and Venus and work something with pairing and sharing with men and women. That would be really cool.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
How do people get in touch with you?
Well, they can go online, www.justgeorgia.ca. You can find information there about what I've done in the past. You can also go to a link that shows some of my current, actually not so current artwork, Changing Direction. That's another benefit to being able to express yourself differently through relationships. My work is now changing to a more abstracted style.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you coming and sharing some of your personal experience with us and all of cyberspace.
Thank you.
You've again the common theme that you've been saying throughout this whole hour is on the communication piece, and that whether men or women, you need to make sure that there's clarity in communication, and being able to share the experience that you went through with someone, get it out, and then allowing the other person to be in that space with you.
Yes.
So, hearing what you're saying, it might be very difficult for anyone to be able to allow someone else to, meet them where they're at in that space, especially when they feel that space is so broken. They feel that space is not a good space. But you also said just kind of get over it. And you kind of have to get over that
in a not so harsh way. I mean, it is a combination of knowledge, know what's happening with you, know where you're at, acceptance. You have to be able to accept what has happened, and then from there you move to understanding, and that will hopefully filter into whoever you have a relationship with.
There's so much fear, and I think, in our society today, there's so much fear that we're surrounded by. Everywhere we go, you turn on the news and it's very fear-based. Somebody's killed, or somebody got mugged or raped or whatever. It's very, everywhere you turn, there's so much fear, and in turn we become very fearful of sharing ourselves with somebody because we don't want to get hurt. But from taking a piece from what you're saying is that the only way to really truly kind of get past, never really get over, but you get past the trauma. So you have to learn the ability to be able to share yourself, share your experience, have that communication, and be able to allow yourself to be able to stand with somebody in the midst of your mess, and then you might be able to dig your way out.
That's right. Soar your way out.
There you go. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
That's true. Soar your way out, because if you hit the bottom of the barrel, there's only really one way to go.
That's right.
And that's up. Once again, I do appreciate you. I would say, check out Georgia's website, justgeorgia.ca, for more information on her services, and maybe if this is something that you've gone through, that you've experienced, Georgia's expertise might be able to help you to bridge the gap so that you can build healthy relationships. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to our show. Next week, I do have a very interesting guest. The topic is actually going to be on sex.
Ooh.
And
the next level.
I've got a resident sex expert that's going to be here. We're going to be talking a little bit about how men and women view things. because there are some misconceptions in and around it. We're going to talk a little bit about sex toys. We're going to talk a little bit about just, healthy relationships from a sexual standpoint. But I'm also going to be bringing on a gentleman to talk more about abuse from a male perspective and how that impacts guys and how we can build bridges. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please tune in next week Sunday, 2 p.m., Mars versus Venus, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
The internet's #1 on the World Wide Web. iLive Radio.
The best music around in stereo. Stereo sound.
Music back to back to back. iLive Radio.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
Rare groove, revival, slow jams, upfront, old school.
The best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network.
The Soul Expression Show with DJ Session. The Soul Expression Show with DJ Session.
Good afternoon, good evening, welcome to Soul Expressions. Tuning around the World Wide Web right now, broadcasting from downtown Toronto. Thank you to everyone that tuned into the Mars versus Venus. Don't forget, catch Patrick Morris next week.